Yeah. So, hello everyone, and welcome to our August parent meetup. We're so happy that we could come together and the start of the school year. The summer went by so quick, and it's hard to believe that it's time to go back to school. I know our son just started this past Monday, the 21st. A lot
Mm.
of kids don't start until the 28th, and you've got kids going back to college and everything. Everybody's starting to settle in to the thoughts of going back into the school and the learning environment. And so we wanted to have this parent meetup just to start talking about ways we can support our children, our highly intuitive children in their schools, whatever level school that they are, from elementary, middle, high school, beyond, and just what we can do to help them manage with their gifts and share our stories of what we've experienced with our children. And these stories will hopefully help others who are experiencing similar or trying to figure out what to do or how to work through this. One of the first things I wanted to touch on, we'll touch on a couple different
Mm.
categories, but some questions that I've recently had from a few parents, and I have had some teachers talking to me about some different things as well. So we'll go through and touch on those
Mhm.
items. One of the things that we wanted to talk about is like the importance. One, the school for a highly intuitive child is very important. The school, the type of school, the school environment, all of that is very important. And one of the things that is really, I actually wanted to screen share because I had this little slideshow put together,
Mhm.
and I think it's helpful just to know that we'll come to that in a second, actually, that highly intuitive kids are intuitive learners.
Mm.
And because they're intuitive learners, that shapes the way they perceive the world and their whole world. So actually, I will go ahead and let me screen share this just because I think it's a fascinating slide here. So everybody can see this is highly intuitive kids are intuitive learners. And that's what their dominant trait is, intuition. And so it shapes how they perceive the world and how they move through the world, and whether it's at home or at school. The thing is, with the school system, our teachers do a great job. They're trying to manage the kids and the curriculum and what they need to do with it. It's just that the school curriculums don't fully support and don't encourage the intuitive learning style. And if that's a child's primary learning style, it gets hard to navigate school at times because you can feel more stressed, you can feel like you're not understood, you can feel like kids start to daydream, they don't, because they think differently in how they make intuitive leaps in information. So this slide is just telling you the current school curriculum is a very five sense oriented curriculum. And when you have children that their primarily learn through this extra perception and through this, the sixth sense ability, it gets hard for them in trying to just always be in this five sense state and way of thinking and being. And so that's where our intuitive learners, like it says here, they're your dreamers, discoverers, your dynamos, and that they think big picture. And sometimes these kids can skip over details and leave tasks unfinished. And teachers may think that they're not doing their work, but it's the way they're processing it. And they may sometimes, and I can use an example, our son, like with math, sometimes he'll just write down answers and he'll get them right. And we're trying to, and the teachers are saying, well, it's fine that he got them right, but he's not putting the details down. And so he's getting marked down, but it's like, well, the answer's right, but he can make big leaps. And I know there's a lot of children, intuitive learners can do that. And so that's one of the things that, just for parents to be aware, but that's something to consider. So when you're thinking about schools for your child, um, it's really important to consider what kind of school they go to. And there are some schools have actually helped to foster this kind of a learning a little better than others. So you have like Montessori schools, Waldorf schools, Steiner schools, those that have that kind of open environment where they can explore and look at differences a little more than just your typical public school system. That makes a difference. So, but that's not always a possibility or affordable for parents, but it's something to consider. Classroom size is another thing that is something to consider because I know for our son, we've chosen to, and it's important for him, is that classroom size. The smaller the size, the better, because he doesn't get hit with intuitive overload from being in larger classrooms. So just going back to what does this mean when we're talking about the 5 sense schools, that these intuitive kids tend to be ones that are, they're the big daydreamers, the big visionaries, they come up with the big thoughts and they can intuitively get there and get to big picture conclusions. And with that, like I said, sometimes they can leave the details out, and that's hard. And they can find the details tedious and boring. And it's not that they don't understand or know, it's just they're already, I always use the example that intuitive learners, and you have sensate, or your linear learners. Linear learners in the school system teach ABC 1, 2, 3. Our intuitive learners, they learn ABC and they can go XYZ. They can jump to the end conclusion. They get the flashes of these intuitive insights and already know the answer. And because of this, they can get bored in class because they're waiting for everyone else to catch up to where they've already made the conclusion. So if they're sitting there and they're off daydreaming, they get called on. The teacher's like, oh, you're not paying attention in class, or you're not giving me enough information. But it's because they've already they've already made the big intuitive leap and they're waiting for everyone else to catch up. So with that, their tendency to daydream and get lost in their own big picture thoughts, it can lead to some of our intuitive children being mistakenly labeled with, attention issues, whether it's ADD or ADHD. Sometimes it can, and you have children that have that. You can have that and be intuitive, but you have the intuitive children who get mistakenly labeled this way when it's actually a learning environment, the issue for them. So when you change the learning environment for an intuitive learner and you adjust it to engage, like it says here, and support the way that they learn, those symptoms, they go away. And so this is something we want to talk about so parents can understand this, and even teachers can understand this and take this into consideration as we're educating our children and looking. And these kids, because they already feel different, and then if this is the way they perceive the world, and they're being made to feel like, oh, you're not giving me enough details, or you're not, sharing it, then they start taking that on internally, like they're not doing something right, or they're not feeling good. It starts to affect their self-esteem and how their way of perceiving the world may seem like, and how they process things may seem bad or wrong. And not that that's intended that way, but it's because this learning environment, the curriculum, isn't set up to support that intuitive style of learning. So we always recommend that parents educate themselves about your child's personality traits and their learning styles. One of the ways that we recommend doing that is to, we have the Myers-Briggs out on our Highly Intuitive Kids website. There's a free one. There's lots of different free versions out. You can go out on the internet and check different ones. We just happen to have one up on the site. But and there's books out there, but to educate yourself, especially if you have a teen or tween, they're old enough to take a Myers-Briggs assessment. And when you have that information is powerful, because we did that for our son summer of last year. We had him take it. And when he took it, it just came back and it verified what we knew, that he came out intuitive. And he also came out as in its letters. And so he came out of IN, which is intuitive, F for feeling, which empathic, he's extremely empathic, and then perceiving. So it confirmed what we already knew for him. But one of the things I have been mentioning this, and I've been talking about this in different podcasts that I've been doing, because if schools would consider doing this for kids, and you start understanding who your intuitive learners are up front, and who the linear, if you have a classroom that has more intuitive learners than, say, the linear learners, there's a way you can start looking at how you can gear the curriculum to help support the learning styles. And so some of these children, even for the intuitive children, they can end up being labeled as having behavior issues in class because they're not paying attention. They can be labeled as, like I said, not paying attention. But all of that, when you know how to change the curriculum to support them, then these symptoms can go away. They're more engaged. What appears to be attention symptoms can go away, and they're much more engaged. But also recognizing too, sometimes it is necessary to change teachers or schools. It may be to help, provide better support for your child in the learning environment. And I'll be honest, we've had, John, and you could chime, we've had to change Ethan's school a couple times to make sure that, and it's a lot of upheaval and you don't want to have to do that, but sometimes the trauma of leaving them in an environment that does not support them and that really tears down their self-esteem is worse than the upheaval of moving them and putting them to a much more supportive environment. Would you agree with that, John?
Yeah, at times, you have to make that hard decision. And I'm leaving them in the school sometimes, or leaving your child in the school. You have to weigh it out. You have to kind of look at all the factors, whether the school is going to be supportive to you, or whether the school is going to not be supportive with you. In our case, we had to make that decision that it was going to cause more harm to leave them in school than it would be to have them removed.
Yeah.
And it's a hard decision at times, and sometimes a big financial decision, but you have to, and everybody has to make a decision for themselves. You can try, we try the hardest to work with the schools, and in some cases, in our cases, it wasn't going to be feasible. And we knew that we are going to get the same kind of, treatment and cooperation or lack of cooperation going forward. And then we just have to make some hard decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And each person has to look at it, for what works for your family. But one of the things we also did is we started conversations with the teachers and started opening up and sharing about him being an intuitive and about his learning style and being empathic. And when we started, and also for us, we don't go in and saying psychic because just certain words turn people off. And in that, saying that to a teacher in a classroom, that's not going to get them to open up and understand what your child is experiencing. But talking about, I say being intuitive, that's why we use that word, the word intuitive. People can understand that, an intuitive learner. That's why we tie it to things and talking about like the Myers-Briggs and assessments that people can actually understand. And it will help to normalize the conversation and a way for them to start looking at children differently. But opening up those conversations with teachers has helped, because we actually at his school, his last school, and we started talking about it to the different teachers. And we actually had 2 teachers come forward and say, "Oh, we have that ability too, but we're not out, sharing that with everyone." But what that did for us is it gave us allies that we could say, well, this is what's going on with our son. He's very empathic, he's very intuitive. And we had teachers that could actually help to look out and say, oh, well, we understand him and we can be a resource to help him in the school environment. So that was very helpful, wasn't it, John?
It was. It was kind of shocking because it was like we had a big meeting with the administration, and a couple of teachers had said, this doesn't go out of this room, but I too have those same abilities. So, and it kind of, I guess it gave it more credibility when some of your own staff, they're like, wow, we didn't know that. So it gave a little bit more appreciation of it too. So it seemed to be a little bit more accepting as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it started a conversation and a dialogue, and that was good. And so it just started to open. And we also, one of the things we recommend is, and we did this, was buying resources and giving them to the school. So, for them to just to open to start with those teachers, and like an example, like the Highly Intuitive Child book, we did this one, and we got a bunch of different ones. And we said, just take a look, just read through this, open your minds to it. And now the thing we would say is also go to our Highly Intuitive Kids website, because now that website, that's a huge resource for parents and for teachers. There's information for parents, teachers, other professionals, mental health professionals, anyone that supports a child. So when these conversations are started, which we put that website together, it gives all of you a much even better place than what we started with before having that. You can refer them to that website as a resource. And we actually have links to different studies and different information from like PhDs, incredible resources there. And if anybody knows of others that you come across, please, we're open to adding them to the site as well. But we try and keep this mainstream and normalized so that when people, if there's some type of a clinician or someone or a teacher goes to the site, they can look in those areas. And we encourage parents to not only look at the parents' information, but the educators and the other professionals' information. The more you read and the more you know, you can advocate for your child differently. But you can refer people to that site to help to start open their minds and open conversations about what your child is experiencing. And there's articles on there. We even have like holistic techniques out there, which we'll talk about some of the things to help help children. We talk about classroom environments, challenges, things that children can experience and teachers may encounter. So there's lots of good information out there for people to look at. So that website is definitely a valuable resource. And we can't talk about it enough because before having something like that, when you have these conversations, it's kind of like, oh, people are trying to figure, oh, okay. But when you can refer them somewhere and they can see that, go through the information, go into some of these studies, listen to some of the more detailed research that's out there, it's very helpful. So conversations. And actually, Patty Davis was here for the young kids. She had this book, It's Too Much, elementary school. But this book is I say, buy the books. This is a great story time book for anybody with young children. Story time, you can go in and read books. But this one is it's easy to read, and it starts a conversation. And if teachers can read it, are willing to read it during story time and get kids to start talking, you'll start seeing, which kids are empathic or how it draws out some conversation like, oh, I feel that way. Then you can start having this also ties into like children's social emotional wellness, which is a big thing being pushed with schools now too. And the conversations, and that's important, is embracing more of the whole child. Having these kind of conversations will do that. You start embracing more of the whole child and they can start feeling more comfortable in themselves because, like I mentioned before, these highly intuitive children, and I know me being one of them when I was younger, you feel different and they don't always know how to express what that difference means, but they feel different because of how they perceive things and how they know things or come to experience and sense and conclusions that they come to, and may not even know how they get to these intuitive conclusions that just come up and they're right, or sometimes not, but they just get these flashes of insight. So but definitely different types of resources. That's very helpful for, and there's another one I wanted to show. So you can go, I'm a book person, we're book people. This is the one about dreamers, discoverers, and dynamos. These books you can also find on the website under the books and resources section. One's about Myers-Briggs, if you're not familiar with it, personality assessment. Take a look at the information, educate yourselves, and that will help you to better understand your child, and not just your child, do it as a family. Find out what your personality types are as a family, and then you can start understanding how you perceive things the way you do and why, and how you can start interacting, have the different personalities. You can work with each other better when you have more of an understanding of your personality type. So that's very important. So that the school is important, class size is important. We keep our son in, like I mentioned, small class sizes. We just find that so much better for him because of intuitive overload that can be absorbed during the course of the day. Our highly intuitive children and empathic children, they can tend to absorb the stress of the classroom or the issues in the classroom, or they're feeling what's going on with their classmate or their teachers or the environment in the classroom really makes a big difference for these children. And I know our son can pick up on things from other children. And sometimes he comes home, it's like he can't let go. And we have to do things, and we'll talk about it in a minute, like when he comes home, on having him release what he's picking up when he goes to school. So, but that's very important. And there's different processes we can talk about with how helping them to release. But just some examples, because I just think stories are always so helpful, even in school, because these abilities don't turn off. We've had our son back when he was like in 8th grade. He came home one day from school. It was 2 different stories. He came home one day from school and he was telling me how he was like, Mom, I'm sitting in class, because we were talking about sometimes these kids not paying attention in class. But this also goes to helping your child set boundaries. But he's like, Mom, I was sitting in class. And he said, I looked over and Grandpa was sitting right next to me. Grandpa was in the class with me. Well, because he can feel and pick up on his energy, his grandfather was there. And we had to tell him, we're going to set boundaries, and we get to tell Grandpa he does not go to school with you. He has to stay at home. He can't go with you. And so he told us that scenario. He told us another time of he was in a classroom with his teacher, and he's like, I'm sitting there, and this man walks up to the front of the class and starts talking to the class and trying to teach the class. He said, but he didn't realize he was dead, and he was talking and trying to teach the class. So our son was picking up on different energies, but there was just this energy that came into the classroom that he picked up on, that didn't realize it had transitioned, but must have been a teacher and had come into the classroom. So I just share those stories because that's what some of these children are experiencing. So I asked him, I was like, it's not easy paying attention in class when you're seeing these sixth sense energies around the classroom. He's like, yeah. So sometimes that's when, he's like, I can get distracted by that. But that also goes back to parents helping. We have to help our children to set the boundaries.
And
And
Ellen,
yes,
and the funny part of that story, that was one of the teachers who was a medium,
yes.
who had medium disability. So it was kind of interesting where she was like, yes, I see him too.
And and you're absolutely right. And that was great because she was like, we could talk to her about it, because she was one of the ones that came forward and said, yeah, I have this ability too. And we were able to also offer to her, because we use something called Florida water just to kind of do a clearing. It's important. And that building was an old building. That school was like built in the 1940s. So it carries a lot of old energy in the walls and in the space of it. So we could talk to her about going through and spraying to clear the room, clear the space, clear out energies. And she was open to that. And she started doing that. And so she started going through. And one of the reasons, just quick side note, we use Florida water is because Ethan is asthmatic and he can't do, a lot of people hear white sage or doing sage, and he's allergic to sage, and that is too much for him. So we do Florida water. But you can do Florida water, you can do holy water, you can do different forms of sage, you can do Palo Alto, you can use different types of things. But it was beautiful to have a teacher that was open and understanding that and would clear the space. So she started doing that once a week. And then after that, John and Ethan didn't talk about seeing anything else in her classroom. But I think that's why conversations are important, because just knowing who you can talk to. Some people, we all know, are not as understanding and embracing. We're trying to normalize the conversations around this, but if you can start the conversations and people are open to it, then you can start introducing these different techniques. But clearing the space is really, that was helpful, and that's an important thing. So so that's very important. And then for the classrooms, one of the things that just the classroom environment for kids, we had Rebecca Fiscal Kramer. I'm sorry if I'm saying her name wrong, because I always mix it whether it's Fiscal Kramer or Kramer Fiscal, but Rebecca, she wrote the book, Let Them Move. We had her come in last year and speak, and I want to have her come back this school year as well, because I love her book and I love her whole concept of movement and why that's so important. And even during the day, in the school day, our intuitive kids ground through movement and processing this energy and exercise. And if they can get more movement during the day, for any teachers, folks listening to this, or even homeschoolers, or more movement helps them to process that. And so if you can let children move, take them out, burn off energy, and sometimes they need more movement than the normal recess times that are allowed or the break times. But if they're allowed to get that extra movement in, you'll find they can come back, sit down, and focus right away. But when they have that energy built up in them and they don't have a chance to process it, that intuitive and empathic overload they can sometimes take on, that can sometimes be, mimic that they're not paying attention or they're having, not focused in class. But once they can burn it off, they can come right back and they're able to focus and do what
And I
they.
think it's, yeah, and I think it's important, again, for parents to advocate for their kids. If they know that their child does need that extra bit of movement, to actually just take a conversation with the teacher. And our previous school, we had one student will be allowed to use a little pedal under his desk. He would kind of like pedal like a little bike, little small wheel that he could pedal in the back, and that kind of, he's a very bright kid, and but that was something that kind of gave him a little extra, you know, outlet of energy that he could, put out to, so he could, I guess, stay more in tune to what was going on. So I think it's important for your parents to talk with the teachers and find different ways. Maybe they can stand up at the back of the class, you know, when they're doing their, when the teacher's teaching, and that kind of burns a little energy up, or at least kind of allows them to be active, or maybe even pace in the back of the room. If that helps to focus them, why not?
Right. Agree. You're absolutely right, John. As long as it's not, like you said, if it helps and it's not distracting, or just finding ways of more movement. And I would encourage people to get the book, Let Them Move. It's written for teachers, but for parents as well. And it just talks about different techniques and different ways, just like what you're saying, John, of letting children stand up. Maybe sometimes it might be helpful to have a child, kneeling at a desk, or maybe, doing there's different ways you can do that just to help engage their bodies and burn this energy, process this energy off more. That, or even just walking down the hall. Sometimes kids are like single file, walk this way. Some kids may need to, maybe it might be helpful for them to walk a little different way that burns off some energy. So, and being open to that. So that's what we're advocating for, teachers, and, just understanding and looking at different ways they can incorporate it. Get that book, Rebecca's book, Let Them Move, very good book. And that's one that will be helpful. And even for parents, for home. And it's written more toward elementary school, but it can be modified, everything she's talking in there, for middle school and, and in high school, and can be used at home as well. So that's very important. And then and like we were talking about, having the conversations with the teachers. One example, and because teachers will open up, one thing that we found, even for last year, John, Ethan had a teacher who, on our website, I'm going to talk about meditation. She would start, this teacher was, let me finish that thought. This teacher at our son's old school started, it was a new teacher that came in and opened each class with like a minute meditation of just quiet. And so they would change classes, go from one class, he's in middle school, and go to the next class. But before they started, she would do a minute meditation. And it just kind of helped to ground them, listening to music, and it ground them and brought them back. But one of the things we found, and even just talking with Ethan, is he was like, that was his favorite class. He's like, because that helped him so much, just having that minute to 2 minutes to readjust and reground and to get into the next class. And so that's something that I think would be great, is if any teacher could just take a minute of meditation or breathing, just some deep breathing. That helps to ground and center kids. Those are some techniques, and we actually have those out on the website too, because we put some easy holistic techniques for parents and for teachers, because there are some meditations out there for teachers to pull up, 1 minute, 2 minute, 5 minute, that you can find that can help to calm, center, reground children, and then, help them to focus back on their learning. But also we have meditations out there for parents to use at home too. If you don't know where to start, you can start with the ones that we have on the website, and you can always research and do more and find more that's out there. But even just going back to this, with different techniques to help children, like tapping, that's another one. If anybody's familiar, we had a workshop last year about tapping, and that's a great technique that's starting to get more and more out there, more and more attention with Nick Ortner and the whole tapping solution. We have those books up on the website. This is for parents, teens, and children. This one, that's out there. But yeah, that helps. It can help with that helps with grounding kids. It helps even for adults, pain relief. It helps with self-esteem, all different kinds of things. So tapping is another easy, holistic technique, very easy to learn. We have videos out on the website on using that. I always say, I think every school should do that, should teach that as a technique that kids can do. And they actually use that in Sandy Hook. Oh, Sandy Hook, John, right? Where they had the unfortunately the school shooting.
Yeah.
A lot of the children had PTSD, and it helps with PTSD. And so, it's just a simple technique that it has powerful, powerful benefits. But parents at home, these are not just schools at home. That's something that'd be great to do as a family, to normalize that the more we can teach our kids techniques that help them to self-regulate themselves and get comfortable, the more they'll know how to manage and process their stress and their feelings. Because a lot of our intuitive kids, because they take on the intuitive overload of their environments, when they do that, if they don't ground and shield themselves, if they take that on, it can turn into anxiety. So our highly intuitive kids, there are quite a few that can end up with anxiety. And if anxiety goes on for long periods of time, it can turn into chronic depression. And depression can ultimately, these children are more, can be more prone to suicide, if they experience those extreme emotions for a long period of time. So that's where we want to stay tuned into our kids, because if they're experiencing that, constantly taking on a lot of stress at school and not processing it, it builds up and it becomes a problem. So at home, these techniques, like the exercise, John, you've always talked about, we keep Ethan in track. That's one of the things that helps him, is he's always been a person who loves to run track, cross country and track. But exercise, sports, activities, even just walking outside, not just for children, for adults too, just kicking your shoes off and walking outside barefoot. That's very grounding, because the energy of the earth helps to reset your chakras and get them spinning in the right direction, just walking barefoot outside. But meditation, yoga is another great centering, grounding technique to use, and visualizations. That's a great way to harness and work with, through our imagination and through visualizing, we can work with releasing anything energetically that we've taken on that's been too much, this energy, and regrounding and focusing and centering ourselves using visualization techniques. And there's a lot of different kinds out there. One of them being protective bubble, surrounding yourself in a protective bubble, where you're going to bubble up your energy. You teach your child to do that. We used to do that with Ethan, and he does that now, like surround, ground, shield, surrounding himself in a bubble of white light, and grounding, imagining. And this is Pat Longo's technique. Actually, she taught it to Ethan, and we used that with him. We shortened it to surround, ground, shield. But in visualizing yourself being surrounded in a bubble of white light, and protecting your energy, and everything outside the bubble stays outside. Visualizing that you have cords coming out of your hands and out of your tailbone that goes sink deep down into the earth, to the center of the earth, and ground you to the ground. So that visualization of being grounded, helping to center that way. And then the third part of her technique that she taught to Ethan, we use with him, is to envision that he has a vest of that starts at his shoulders and goes down to his waist, and it protects his solar plexus, where he receives, that's where we receive the bulk of our intuitive information is through there. So by imagining you have a protective vest on, you help to shut that down from absorbing so much information coming in. And then some kids also, kids or adults, sometimes just holding something in front of you or having something in front of your solar plexus helps to cut down on that energy coming in. So, those are some of the, just, those are things like parents, we send them off to school and they're there for, 6 hours, they're there, they pick up a lot, they deal with a lot. And then when they come home, that's where we have to help them to learn techniques to help, manage the stress, release the overload, and help them feel, more grounded in themselves, and that, where they may receive the messaging in school that may not be okay to be intuitive and have these gifts at home, we just have to reinforce that it is and advocate for them at school where we can, and really and do that for them.
Oh, one other just little tidbit, Alan, just when kids are returning back to school. A lot of, and I've learned this one from you, because at times when I would pick Ethan up from school, I would bombard him with a whole lot of questions as soon as he gets into the car. So how was that test? How was that teacher? How was that situation in school? What did you learn? What did you da 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 da? And it's just like, you think about it, you've been bombarded with like 6 hours of classes, friends, and a lot of this energy. And then your parents get you in the car and then they bombard you with a whole bunch of questions and hit you with all this stuff. You're just like, can I just have 10 minutes, 5 minutes to just relax and just chill down for a moment, get into my rhythm, and then we can talk. And so that's just a thought for parents that the kids, just like as if you were coming home from work, unless they want to be, you maybe want a chance to kind of relax and kind of get into the evening to home. And the kids are just little mini versions of ourselves. So I would invite people to, take a look at that and maybe give that 5 minutes of like downtime before or just ask those questions after dinner. You can still get the same results, but just maybe give a chance for a little deep, relaxing and kind of debriefing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's very important because the intuitive timing and rhythm of kids, they need that downtime, the decompression time, so they can recenter themselves and listen to their own inner guidance and come back to that, like you said, without being, oh, I want to have all this, information, asked all these questions. And then for these kids too, because intuitive time and that intuitive rhythm with us is really a slower pace of being able to wanting and needing to check in with that inner guidance system that we have. Just, I know for parents, and I know even for us, we can sometimes get rushed, like, oh, we've got to get here and we've got to do this, and we've got to, for these children, and just for even the adult, you want to have, they need a slower pace, so you can easily overwhelm them when you're rushing, because that's linear time. That's the pressure of, we got to be here, we got to do this and this and that, and this is deadline driven. Intuitive time is just more free flow. They need more time to move into things and not be so rushed, and you'll get better results when so just build in that extra time, that it's not that rush, quick, have to do this and this. You'll get better results from them when it's not, and that's at any age, when it's not so stressed and fast paced and hectic. So, but I want to open up because we have Pete here. I want to see if you have anything you want to add, or any questions that you have that you want to add to the conversation. We're just kind of talking and throwing out a lot of things, but what are some things you noticed with your children, or how are you prepping your children for school? Because you have tweens.
Yes, we do. um, I agree with everything that you've said. It really does take a concerted effort to make sure that they are looked after, not only in the school and the classroom environment. And I know that we have not. Um, I'm not sure how much we have really brought up directly with teachers with regards to our kids. We really, I tended to be, I'm not sure how much your teachers may or may not help or support you, but here's what you can do if for some reason you're found on the wrong end of this. And this is where I completely agree with the movement stuff that you've talked about, because there are quite often, whether it's me or the kids or whatever, I know they can get so overwhelmed if you say, uh, just breathe or visualize something. It becomes almost impossible because but if there's something physical you can revert back to that doesn't require immediate thought, or sit down and breathe, or sit down. To me, it's the tapping is wonderful, particularly when you're banging on that kidney meridian that grounds them. That's a wonderful thing because sometimes it's almost worse when you're. I know that if somebody tells me to, well, just take a breath or do this or visualize this, I can't do it.
Mhm.
And it's the same. I realize the same with my kids. And so I said, well, okay, if it's going, you feel like you're ramping up like this, do the tap, do the 27, do something like this. I know that in the classrooms that they're in, the teachers are less amenable to have, um, in our case, for one of our kids to stand, because they find that, well, then every kid's going to want to stand, and then I'm never going to get them seated back down. And there's an issue that, so I said, well, okay, what else can we do? Can they go to the restroom if they feel they need to? This type of stuff. So it's, we had to kind of backhand our way into it on a couple of occasions. Some of many of the female teachers are great. Some of the more male students who want more of a absolute control over the classroom, they haven't been as um, interested in hearing what we might suggest. But as I said, I've always tried to say, well, here's what you can do yourself if you feel like this is going. And that's why we try to equip them with that. And I think they've taken some more as they've gotten older, as I'm sure your son does, they begin to take a little more responsibility for their stuff and their own energy. When they were young, holy cow, it was just chaos. The way they'd come home and you'd never know what mood they'd be in, and this. So I think it's wonderful. The getting up, the movement, the tapping, I completely agree with. And they've done, and if you have teachers that are amenable to it and will actually listen, I think that's wonderful. We haven't always encountered, we're in a very old, is private school steeped in tradition and this, that, and there's not always a lot of wiggle room there to what they consider to be the way that they've worked for the past 300 years. So it's kind of, we backhanded our way in it, felt our way through the teacher conferences, see who might be there, and just be kind of, not everybody's going to listen. And I think that's where trying it is wonderful. And then, we equip our kids on the other end of it. Is the only thing I think I can really suggest. And I do know that when you talked about the questions, that really hit home. That was such an issue. And I believe it was my daughter that said, questions are requiring energy of me. Why don't you tell me about your day? And, I was like, okay, she's right. Even though I really want to know how the day went, so then when I pick them up, when I do, it's more like, well, here's what happened to me today. And then they begin to just kind of riff off of that themselves. But I didn't really think about it. But when you're asking questions, you're right. You're asking energy from them. And they may not have enough left. with what their day has been and as such. So I think I started doing that even at the dinner table. Sometimes I just say, well, I'll tell you what happened to me. I'm not going to ask you questions. And so I mean that's worked for us. And but I think you're right there. And if only some of these resources that existed earlier, holy cow, it would have been a lot easier. So that's why I'm so glad with what you're doing.
Well, Pete, and thanks for all that you were just sharing too, because a couple points you made that I think is important also to bring back out is not everything works, different techniques. That's why there's a variety out there. Different things work for different children. And as a parent, you have to figure out what works best. Because like you're saying, I can even just say for me, people always, oh, meditate, meditate, meditate. I can't sit and just meditate. So for me, I walk. If I'm going to meditate, I do walking meditation. I do movement meditations because that is for me, it just processes that energy and I can do it in that way. But if you just say, sit there and just do that, I mean, I can do it, but that's not what works best for me. And that's okay. And everyone's got to find what works for them and what works for your child. Tapping may work for some may do, but visualization may not. Some may do better with visualization than tapping or breathing exercise, but every parent's got to get in tune with that. The thing is when you receive your child coming home, it's finding those ways. And even art is a great release and can be therapy, whatever that may be. Maybe your child likes to draw, maybe they like to dance, maybe they like to paint. That's a great way to process and for them to come down from their day and process that stress. And even with art, they can draw how their day went, which can give a parent insight into what's happened with them. But yeah, just that whole thought of like, our son is always saying, I need decompression time. And we love that he can verbalize like that. When he comes home, he's like, I got to have a half hour before I do anything else, because he's got to have that transition and that release time. But you can always tell, any parent, you can tell how much your child has taken on if when they come home, especially like younger children or any age, but younger children, if they fall apart when they get home or they just sleep on it, they've taken on a lot during the course of the day. And so you need to look at that and how you can help them to set more boundaries, more and release what they've taken on during the day. Because like we mentioned, these kids, when they constantly are getting bombarded with that, it can turn into anxiety. That stress, that daily stress can turn into long-term anxiety. So we got to just keep them processing and finding ways to process. But Pete, you also mentioned something. One of the things that our son, as he started learning how to manage himself, he said he would do just what you mentioned. He would tell every class, he would tell the teacher, I have to go to the bathroom. And he said he didn't have to go to the bathroom, but he just went in the bathroom because it removed himself from the classroom and from the hallway, changing all the energy around him. And it just gave him a 5-minute break to kind of reset so then he could go back and do what he needed to do. So even little things like that are helpful. And you're right, not every school is going to be understanding. Not all teachers and environments are going to be on board or be able to be supportive of this. But it's just as a parent teaching your child little techniques or things that they can use to help manage themselves in the environment if you can't really find a way to make it supportive of them by either changing schools or sometimes changing teachers or creating that space or having those conversations, because it's not always easy. But I think the more conversations, and if you can get the door open a little bit, providing resources, talking about our website, we're hoping to create some openings and some understanding, a little bit of open-mindedness to get people to look at this a little differently.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. So, but as we went through a whole bunch of things there for parents, but it's like being able to prepare them to let them not rush them in the morning, talk and keep them talking, keep them talking and being open with them, but like I said, not bombarding them, but getting them to open up so you can always kind of gauge where your child is. If you find they're taking on too much stress and you're not able to help them release it or talk or work with them through it, then, never hesitate to seek professional help if you need to, that's always something you want to take into consideration if your child is, if you can't help them with the chronic anxiety that they're experiencing. But just always know that changing environment can help with that, because like we've talked about, John, had to move him, Ethan, a couple times, but each time, because he was experiencing a lot of intuitive overload and anxiety that went with it. But now, putting him in a better environment where smaller class size is not, it's helped to change that, and release that. And that's, parents just have to tune in and see what works for you and how you can manage that with your child.
I will add that the Myers-Briggs stuff, I highly recommend that also. It wasn't as much with my daughter, but my son, now that he's older, there was, when he finally took it, there was, in some ways, there was almost a relief, because it's like, I was like, buddy, that's how you're wired. It's okay. That's how you're wired. And it was suddenly like, okay, it made it okay or something. I don't know how to describe it, but there was a piece of it that he finally said, oh, okay. And I said, here, I showed him what mine was, because I've tested, I think, INTJ ever since we started here, and for years. And so I said, well, I'll do it again just myself to me. And sure enough, I came back exactly the same way. So it opened up a conversation between us both. I said, we both kind of share that. We're both wired this way. Mommy's wired this way. Your daughter, your sister is. It helped open that conversation, but it also said, it's not that there's anything good, bad, indifferent. It's just, that's the way, like anything, you're wired this way, and that's okay. I do know that that there's a test for the Chinese elements also, what fire, earth, this type. They have an interesting personality profile that they build also, that is good. When you're, I think of it more as, if you understand your element and somebody else's element, you can know how to interact with them better. So the kids and I took that test. And so, my son was, I think, fire and earth, and I'm wood and metal. And I said, well, all right, well, if I, as a wood, you push me, I'm probably my default's going to be anger, because I'm wood. I want to get things done, get out of my way. So we took some time to discuss that also. And that kind of relieved some of that pressure when they thought, well, daddy's just angry. And it's like, well, no, that's the default way he's going to react. So that was another piece, along with the Myers-Briggs, that opened up some discussions for us, that made him realize that I'm not really angry at him. I'm just kind of default going to be, come on, let's go, because I want to get things done. So that was another thing. One of the Eden sisters, Dondi Dolan, she has a neat test online that does that also. But when the kids get a little bit older, just that understanding that this is the way I'm wired, this is probably the way I'm going to react, and I'm okay with that. So how can I do it? So as I said, the Myers-Briggs in particular, that was a good discussion we had after taking that. And I took it right off your site.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for that. That's great, because that is very powerful. And I have to say, you got a great personality type, because I got the same one. I'm INTJ.
Yeah.
Forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it does open it, and it gives context, so like you can understand. But share that, tell me that, I'll add it to the site, the fire and earth and all of that, because I think
I'll send it to you. It's she does we use it in business. It helps with employee relations. And the main thing is it just, if you understand what somebody else's kind of default reaction when they're under pressure versus when they're something, it allows us to look at somebody and say, I don't have to take this personally, because when somebody is a water, for example, they're going to be run straight into panic, or they're going to be whatever it was. And it just enabled us, when we did it among all the managers, it allowed that, and it allowed the kids to think, well, I said, well, Benton, maybe your teacher's a water. And so maybe when she gets upset, this is what happens. So suddenly it allows you to depersonalize it. And that takes some of the stress and the pressure, and it stops some of the absorption, that overwhelm. So I'll send it to you. But that was an interesting one also.
That's great. Thank you. Because any information like that's helpful. We'll add it to the site for others, because some people will the Myers-Briggs, I think is great because I've done that one for
It's
years.
wonderful. Yeah.
That's an excellent test. And then we can do this one too. But the more we understand ourselves and help our children understand themselves and have a context for it, like it's just not that I'm just, I feel different or feel weird and I don't understand it, but you have words and context around it's like, oh, okay, now I understand.
Yeah.
I can appreciate it. So, but thank you for sharing that. But I know I'm going to just about at an hour, I'm going to
Okay.
wrap up. So it's been a great conversation. Thank you for all that you've shared, Pete. Thank you, John. The conversation back and forth. We'll put this out there and hopefully parents will get some tidbits of information out of this and teachers and educators, anybody else who listens to this to help. But you can always go to our highlyintuitivekids.com website. You're in the parent group. If you ever have any questions, just, direct message me or our highlyintuitivekids@gmail.com or just post it in the group. And we can keep conversations going. But the more we talk about this, everyone's had different experiences with their children because every child is unique. Every adult has had, most of us are highly intuitive as well. We can share insights and help each other. So, just appreciate keeping the dialogue going, try and continue to normalize this and keep this spreading out to as many people as possible. And we're still doing workshops with the Illuminate festivals, getting out into local communities, having some of these conversations. And the more we can keep pushing this, we're hoping to, continue to make more changes to help our children. So thank you.
Well,
thank you all.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Pete.
And we will get together again next month for our next parent meetup. So
Thank you.
thanks.